My name is Clara, and I'm 32 years old. Last Tuesday, my phone buzzed on the polished surface of a boardroom table, interrupting the final signatures on the biggest deal of my life. I glanced down. It was a text from my father. 5 simple, brutal words. Don't bother coming to the family reunion. My heart didn't break. It had been chipped away at for so long, there wasn't much left to shatter. It just felt cold, like the final lock clicking into place. I took a deep breath, ignored the curious glances of the lawyers around me, and typed back a single word. Understood. Then I put my phone away and signed the last document, finalizing my purchase of the Lakeside Manor, the very 5-star resort he had booked for the event. My father, Richard Davenport, a man who prided himself on his power and control, thought he was delivering the ultimate rejection, casting me out for good. He had no idea he had just been uninvited from his own party. For as long as I can remember, the Davenport family reunion has been less a celebration of family and more a gladiator-style tournament of success, orchestrated by my father. It was an annual showcase where my older brother Mark, the golden boy and heir apparent to my father's real estate empire, would be paraded around. His promotions, his new sports car, his perfectly pedigreed wife, all were topics of grand toasts. My accomplishments, on the other hand, were footnotes, if they were mentioned at all. My small but growing tech startup was Clara's little computer hobby. My master's degree was a nice thing to have, I suppose. I was the family's designated disappointment, the quiet, artistic daughter who didn't fit the cutthroat mold of the Davenport name. This year's reunion was meant to be the pinnacle of their gloating. My father had just closed a massive deal, and Mark had just been made a full partner. The text wasn't just an exclusion, it was a statement. It was meant to be the final public declaration that I was not one of them. He probably imagined me receiving it in my modest apartment, the one he so often called quaint, and dissolving into tears. He envisioned me spending the weekend alone, picturing them all laughing and celebrating without me. The humiliation was the point. That was always the point. But as I sat there, holding the pen that had just made me the owner of their playground, a different feeling washed over me. Not sadness, not even anger. It was a calm, crystalline clarity. The game they had been playing my whole life was finally over, because I was about to change all the rules. It's an incredibly isolating feeling when the people who are supposed to be your biggest supporters are the ones actively trying to tear you down. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who constantly underestimated you? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might just be the inspiration someone else needs to see right now. And trust me, you'll want to subscribe because the story of this particular family reunion is one for the ages. The pattern of being the family's afterthought started so early, it feels less like a memory and more like a core part of my identity. I was the quiet one, the bookish one, the one who would rather spend hours learning how to code on our ancient desktop computer than play the aggressive, loud games my father encouraged. Mark, 2 years my senior, was his perfect echo. He was loud, he was competitive, and his interests, sports, business, anything where you could definitively crush an opponent, aligned perfectly with my father's worldview. To my father, the world was a zero-sum game, and you were either a winner or a loser. Mark was groomed to be a winner. I was, by default, the other thing. I remember one Christmas when I was about 12. I had spent months saving my allowance and doing odd jobs to buy a complex robotics kit. I worked on it secretly in my room, following intricate diagrams, soldering tiny connections. I was so proud of it. On Christmas morning, Mark unwrapped a top-of-the-line brand-name bicycle, the one he'd been talking about for weeks. My father beamed, slapping him on the back, talking about all the races he would win. Then it was my turn. I presented my robot to them. It wasn't flashy, just a metal chassis with wheels and a circuit board. I turned it on, and using a little controller I'd programmed myself, I made it navigate an obstacle course I'd built out of books. For a moment, there was silence. My mother offered a polite, "Oh, Clara, that's very clever." My father just stared at it, a frown creasing his forehead. "What's the point of it?" he asked. Not, "How does it work?" or "What can it do?" but "What's the point?" Before I could even answer, Mark laughed and said, "It looks like a metal bug." My father chuckled. The tension broke. And that was it. My project, my passion, was dismissed as a pointless, bug-like toy. The bicycle was wheeled out to the garage for immediate admiration. My robot went back to my room, and I never showed them another project again. This dynamic only intensified as we got older. When it was time for college, it was a foregone conclusion that Mark would go to Wharton for business, following in my father's footsteps. The announcement was made at a fancy dinner, complete with a champagne toast to the future of Davenport Properties. A few months later, when I announced my acceptance into Stanford's computer science program, the reaction was different. "Stanford?" my father said, swirling his wine. "That's a long way away. And for computers? Isn't that more of a technical trade? Mark is learning how to run the world and you want to learn how to type." The condescension was thick enough to choke on. My brother snickered. "Don't worry, Dad. When she's done, I'm sure I can find a spot for her in our IT department." They laughed. It was a joke to them, but it was my future. To them, my ambition was incomprehensible because it wasn't their ambition. It wasn't about building their empire. It was about building my own. And that was a threat they couldn't even articulate yet. The real betrayal, the moment the casual dismissal curdled into active sabotage, came about 5 years ago. My startup, Innovate, was finally gaining traction. I had a solid business plan, a working prototype for a revolutionary data management software, and a small, dedicated team. But we needed seed funding to scale. I never would have asked my father for money. I knew better. But I managed to land a meeting with a prominent venture capitalist, a man named Arthur Vance, who happened to be a golfing buddy of my father's. The meeting was incredible. Arthur got it. He saw the potential. He loved the prototype, and he was ready to make a significant offer. He shook my hand, his eyes alight with excitement, and told me his office would be in touch with the term sheet within the week. I was floating. For the first time, I felt like I was truly going to make it, on my own terms. A week passed. Then 2. My calls to Arthur's office went unreturned. Finally, I received a curt email from his assistant stating that they had decided to pursue other investment opportunities. No explanation, no feedback, just a closed door. I was devastated and confused. It was only 6 months later, at a charity event I was forced to attend, that I found out why. I ran into Arthur's wife, who, after a few glasses of champagne, told me, "Oh, you're Richard's daughter. Arthur was so impressed with your little company. But you know, Richard told him to be careful. He said you were brilliant, but flighty, and that you lacked the killer instinct to see it through. He said he didn't want to see his friend lose his money on a family vanity project." The air left my lungs. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't a weak pitch. It was my own father. He had picked up the phone and poisoned the well. He couldn't stand the thought of me succeeding outside of his shadow, so he actively, deliberately cut my legs out from under me. He didn't want me to fail. He just wanted to ensure that the only way I could ever succeed was through him. That way, he would always own my success. That night, after learning about my father's betrayal, I didn't cry. I sat in my small apartment, the one he called quaint, and I felt a rage so cold and pure it burned away all the grief. The need for his approval, a thirst I'd carried my entire life, evaporated in that fire. He hadn't just insulted me. He had declared war on my future. He had called me flighty and said I lacked a killer instinct. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me because it revealed what he truly valued. And in that moment, I decided I would give him a killer instinct he would never forget. That was the night I went dark. I stopped mentioning my work to my family. When they asked what I was doing, I gave vague, boring answers. "Oh, just some freelance coding. Working on a few small projects." They heard what they wanted to hear, that my little computer hobby had fizzled out, just as they'd predicted. My brother Mark once cornered me at Thanksgiving, a smirk on his face, and offered me a job doing data entry at his firm. "The pay isn't great," he'd said, patting my shoulder with pity, "but it's stable. At least you'd have benefits." I just smiled and said, "Thanks, Mark. I'll keep that in mind." Their condescension became my shield. Their low expectations became my camouflage. While they toasted to their own successes, I was in the trenches, working 18-hour days, bootstrapping Innovate with every dollar I could scrape together. I coded until my eyes burned. I lived on coffee and instant noodles. I poured every ounce of that cold rage into my work. For 5 years, I built my company in the shadows. I found 2 brilliant partners, people who had no connection to my family's world, who believed in the software, and, more importantly, who believed in me. We didn't chase big venture capital. We grew organically, focusing on creating a product so good, so undeniably superior, that it would speak for itself. We secured small strategic contracts, building a reputation for excellence in a niche but highly profitable sector of the tech world. My family thought I was a failure. In reality, I was building an empire right under their noses. The turning point wasn't a single revelation, but a quiet email that landed in my inbox 3 months ago. The subject line was simple: Acquisition Inquiry, Project Nightfall. Nightfall was the internal code name for our flagship software. The email was from the corporate development office of a global tech conglomerate, a titan of the industry. They had been tracking our progress for over a year. They weren't interested in seed funding, they wanted to buy us. Outright. The first meeting was surreal. I walked into a skyscraper in downtown San Francisco, a place my father would have killed to have his name on. I wasn't there to ask for a loan. I was there as the founder and majority shareholder of a company they desperately wanted. They didn't see a flighty girl with a hobby. They saw the architect of a technology they knew would dominate the market for the next decade. When they presented their initial offer, I almost stopped breathing. The number on the paper wasn't just money. It was freedom. It was power. It was a sledgehammer. I held that offer in my hands, and I thought of my father's words. Killer instinct. I finally understood what it meant. It wasn't about being loud or cruel. It was about seeing the board, understanding your opponent's weaknesses, and moving your pieces with absolute precision. For my entire life, my family had been playing checkers, loudly crowing every time they took one of my pieces. I was about to play chess. 2 weeks later, I overheard my mother on the phone, excitedly telling my aunt about the upcoming family reunion. "Richard booked the entire Lakeside Manor for the weekend," she gushed. "It's to celebrate his and Mark's big year. It's going to be the event of the season." And that's when the plan clicked into place, fully formed and terrifyingly perfect. The stage for their greatest triumph would become the stage for their public undoing. I called my lawyer the next day. "I want to buy a hotel," I said, "the Lakeside Manor, and I need it done quietly and very, very quickly." The game was no longer about proving them wrong. It was about taking control of the narrative, once and for all. The next 3 months were a masterclass in covert operations. On one front, I was negotiating the sale of my company. My days were filled with due diligence, legal reviews, and tense negotiations with some of the sharpest corporate minds in the country. I learned more about contracts, leverage, and corporate warfare in those 12 weeks than my brother probably learned in his entire MBA program. They started with a number that would have changed my life. I countered with a number that would change the industry. They balked. I presented them with our latest performance metrics and a roadmap for future applications of the technology that they hadn't even considered. I wasn't just selling a company, I was selling a vision. And I was completely detached, completely unemotional. I was willing to walk away, and they knew it. That was my power. Simultaneously, on a second front, I was buying a hotel. The Lakeside Manor wasn't just some random property. It was an institution, a historic landmark known for its old-world elegance and exclusivity. It was also, I discovered, in quiet financial distress. The elderly owner was asset-rich but cash-poor, and he was looking for a discreet, all-cash buyer to avoid a public, messy sale that could tarnish the hotel's legacy. My initial offer, made through a newly created holding company with an intentionally boring name, Horizon Hospitality Group, was substantial. My lawyers handled everything, creating a wall of corporate jargon and legal entities between me and the seller. My name appeared nowhere on the primary documents. To the world, a faceless corporation was acquiring a prestigious resort. To me, I was buying the stage. While all this was happening, I played the part of the dutifully distant daughter. I answered my mother's occasional calls with polite monosyllables. She'd talk at length about the reunion preparations, the floral arrangements, the custom menu, the string quartet my father had insisted on hiring. "It's such a shame you won't be there, dear," she'd say, a hint of manufactured sympathy in her voice. Your father just feels, well, you know, it's a celebration of business success, and he didn't want you to feel uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. That was the word they used for my existence. I would just hum in agreement. I understand, Mom. You guys have fun. I let them believe I was sitting at home, licking my wounds. The more they underestimated me, the more powerful I became. The best part was the information I now had access to as the silent, incoming owner of the manor. The hotel's event manager, a wonderfully efficient woman named Eleanor, kept my new general manager in the loop on all major bookings, which meant I saw every detail of my father's planning. I saw the exorbitant invoice for the champagne he'd ordered, the same vintage they'd toasted with when Mark went to Wharton. I saw the seating chart, which placed all of his most influential business partners and rivals at the head table. I saw the schedule of events, culminating in a grand Saturday night dinner where, according to the notes, Mr. Richard Davenport will be making a keynote speech and a significant family announcement. I knew that announcement was supposed to be about Mark taking over a new, massive division of the company. It was the public coronation, and I was going to be the ghost at the feast. The two deals closed within a day of each other. First, the acquisition of Innovate was finalized. The money, a truly staggering amount, hit the holding company's account. Hours later, that money was wired to complete the purchase of the Lakeside Manor. It all happened so fast, so cleanly, that it barely felt real. That evening, I sat in my apartment, staring at two documents. One was the press release from the tech conglomerate, announcing the acquisition of Innovate and naming me as the president of the new Advanced Technology Division, complete with a laudatory quote from their CEO praising my vision and unparalleled technical expertise. The other was the deed to the Lakeside Manor. It was that night, as I was looking at the deed, that my father's text came through. "Don't bother coming to the family reunion." I looked at the text, I looked at the deed, and I typed back, "Understood." The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for them to walk into it. I arrived at the Lakeside Manor on Saturday evening, not as a guest, but as the owner. I wore a simple, elegant black dress, a stark contrast to the glittering gowns and tuxedos flowing into the grand ballroom. I didn't go in. Instead, I went to the hotel's central control room, a place I now knew intimately. With me were my general manager and a small tech crew. On a bank of monitors, we had feeds from every camera in the ballroom. It was like watching a movie of my own life, but this time, I was the director. I watched them all arrive, my aunts and uncles, my cousins, all the peripheral characters in my family's drama. I saw my mother, glowing, accepting compliments on the decor. I saw my brother, Mark, swaggering through the crowd, shaking hands, already playing the part of the man in charge. And then I saw my father, standing at the entrance like a king surveying his court. He looked powerful, satisfied, completely in his element. He was the master of this universe, my universe. The dinner service began. The string quartet played. The champagne flowed. I let them have their moment. I let them bask in the glory of what they believed to be their victory. Through the speakers, I could hear the clinking of glasses and the murmur of conversation. I heard my father's business rivals congratulating him. I even saw Arthur Vance, the venture capitalist my father had warned away from me, giving him a hearty pat on the back. The irony was almost too much to bear. Finally, the moment came. The main course was cleared, and the lights dimmed slightly. My father walked to the podium at the front of the room, a microphone in his hand. A hush fell over the crowd. I leaned forward, my eyes fixed on the main monitor. "Friends, family, esteemed colleagues," he began, his voice booming with confidence. "Welcome. It fills my heart to see you all here tonight at this beautiful venue to celebrate the continued success of the Davenport family." He paused for applause, which was generous. "We are here to celebrate not just the past, but the future, a future of strength, ambition, and legacy." He went on for a few minutes, thanking people, telling a self-congratulatory anecdote about a recent business deal. Then he turned to my brother. "And the cornerstone of that future is my son, Mark. I am immensely proud to announce tonight that he will be taking the helm as president of our new International Development Division." The room erupted. Mark stood up, beaming, waving to the crowd. My mother dabbed a tear from her eye. This was it. The coronation. As the applause began to die down, my father held up a hand. Thank you, thank you. This is a proud moment. It's a testament to what can be achieved with focus and a true killer instinct. It's a quality, unfortunately, not everyone in a family possesses. A few people who knew our family dynamic chuckled knowingly. It was a direct public stab at me, his absent, failed daughter. That was my cue. I picked up a microphone in the control room. And on that note, my voice suddenly cut through the ballroom's sound system, sharp and clear. I'd like to add my own congratulations. A collective gasp swept through the room. Heads whipped around, searching for the source of the voice. My father froze at the podium, his face a mask of confusion. Mark's smile vanished. On the monitors, I could see their panicked expressions perfectly. For those of you who don't know me, I continued, my voice calm and steady, my name is Clara Davenport. Whispers turned into frantic murmurs. My father is right. It is a big night for the family. In fact, it's a bigger night than he realizes. My father finally found his voice. Clara, what is the meaning of this? Who let you in here? Cut the microphone. He barked at the hotel staff, who, of course, did nothing. They worked for me now. Don't worry, father, I said, the words echoing around them. I let myself in. You see, while you were planning this party, I was a little busy. I was busy selling my little computer hobby, Innovate, to a global tech firm for a sum that would make your year's profits look like a rounding error. I was busy being appointed the president of their new technology division. I paused as the giant screen behind the podium, the one that was supposed to show a slideshow of Mark's achievements, flickered to life. On it appeared the official press release of the acquisition, my picture next to the CEO's, the headline stark and undeniable. The silence in the room was absolute. I could see Arthur Vance's jaw literally drop. And with some of my newfound spare time, I went on, my voice hardening, I decided to diversify my portfolio. I've always had an interest in hospitality, so I bought this place. I let that sink in. Welcome, everyone, to my hotel. I do hope you're enjoying the service. I personally approved the menu. My father looked like he'd been struck by lightning. His face, once florid with pride, was now a ghastly white. My mother looked like she was going to faint. Mark just stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. You said I lacked a killer instinct, father, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, yet it carried to every corner of the room. You went behind my back and you told Arthur Vance, hello, Arthur, you're looking well, that I was a flighty investment. You tried to sabotage my future to keep me under your control. You were right about one thing. I didn't have a killer instinct. You taught me I needed one. So, consider this my graduation. I stepped out from the control room and began the long walk to the ballroom. Every eye turned to me as I entered. I walked past the stunned faces of my relatives, past the shocked expressions of my father's colleagues, and I didn't stop until I was standing right in front of the podium. I looked up at my father, who seemed to have aged a decade in 5 minutes. The party's over, I said, my voice now just for him. The bookings for this event were made under the old management. Under the new management, my management, we have a different policy regarding guests who are disrespectful to the owner. Your reservation for the entire weekend has been cancelled, effective immediately. I turned to the room. The champagne, however, is on the house. Please, everyone, enjoy the rest of your evening. Then I turned back to my father, my brother, and my mother, who were huddled together like survivors of a shipwreck. You have 30 minutes to vacate the premises. My security team will escort you out. There was no grand explosion, no screaming match, just a deafening, humiliating silence as 2 of my uniformed security guards, polite but firm, approached my family. My father, a man who had never been told no in his life, was rendered speechless. His authority, the very air he breathed, had been vacuumed out of the room. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for the first time I could ever remember, but he found nothing there. The daughter he knew, the one who would have withered under his glare, was gone. In her place was a stranger, the owner of the hotel, calmly watching him be evicted. My mother started to cry, quiet, hiccuping sobs. My brother Mark, his face burning with a mixture of rage and shame, tried to argue with the guards. "Do you know who we are?" he hissed, but his voice lacked its usual arrogance. The guard simply replied, "Yes, sir, we've been instructed to escort you out." Defeated, they were led through the ballroom. The path parted for them, guests averting their eyes, pretending to be fascinated by their wine glasses or the pattern on the carpet. It was a walk of shame more potent than anything I could have engineered. Their social standing, built on a foundation of perceived power, crumbled in real time. They weren't just being kicked out of a party. They were being ejected from the world they had so carefully constructed. As the ballroom doors swung shut behind them, a strange thing happened. The tension didn't just break, it transformed. People started talking, not in whispers, but in buzzing, excited tones. Several of my father's business associates, men who had just been clapping for him, made a beeline for me. The first to reach me was, of all people, Arthur Vance. He looked at me with a newfound, almost fearful respect. "Clara," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. I had no idea. Your father told me. Well, it doesn't matter what he told me. He was wrong. I was a fool to listen." He handed me his card. "If your new division ever needs a secondary round of funding, or if you ever decide to branch out again, you call me first. Please." One by one, they came over. They didn't see me as Richard Davenport's daughter anymore. They saw me. They saw the woman who had outplayed him. They saw the new power in the room. I didn't gloat. I was polite, professional, and I directed all business inquiries to my new assistant, who was conveniently waiting by my side with a tablet. The party they had intended for themselves became my coming-out party. I had not only taken their stage, I had stolen their audience. Later that night, I walked out onto the grand terrace overlooking the lake. The string quartet had, on my instruction, switched from stuffy classical music to something more modern and lively. The air was filled with laughter. I had thought this moment would feel like a victory, a fiery triumph. But it didn't. It felt quiet. It felt like peace. The burning rage that had fueled me for 5 years had finally cooled, leaving behind a calm, steady strength. I wasn't Richard Davenport's daughter or Mark's sister. I wasn't the family disappointment or the flighty girl with a hobby. I was Clara, founder, president, owner. The next morning, the news of the Davenports' public humiliation was the talk of their social and business circles. My father's reputation for being an untouchable titan took a fatal blow. How could you trust a man's business judgment when he couldn't even see the empire being built in his own family? Mark's promotion was overshadowed entirely by his public disgrace. The calls they received weren't of congratulations, but of gossip and thinly veiled pity. Their power was an illusion, propped up by the perception of others, and I had shattered the mirror. My phone buzzed. It was a long, rambling text from my mother, full of accusations and pleas and, "How could you do this to your family?" I read it, and for the first time, I felt a pang of something like sadness. Not for them, but for the family we could have been. The family we never were. Then I deleted the message without replying. I was finally free. The chains of seeking their approval, of living in their shadow, were broken. I looked out at the sunrise over my lake, at my hotel, and I took a deep breath of the clean, morning air. It was the first breath of the rest of my life. Looking back, it's easy to see the whole story as one of revenge. And in a way, it was. I won't deny the deep, satisfying justice I felt watching my father's carefully constructed world shatter. But the real victory wasn't about tearing them down. It was about what I built in the process. For years, I defined myself by their metrics. I was either succeeding in their eyes or failing. My worth was a reflection of their approval. The greatest thing my father ever did for me was to sabotage me so completely that I had no choice but to find my own definition of success. He thought he was pushing me off a cliff, but he just forced me to learn how to fly. My life is very different now. I oversee a division that is creating technology that will shape the future. I am revitalizing a historic hotel, turning it into a place of warmth and genuine welcome, the opposite of the cold stage my father tried to make it. I've built a new family, a family of partners, colleagues, and friends who value me for my mind and my character, not my name or my connections. They see my passion not as a hobby, but as a strength. They see my quiet nature not as a weakness, but as a sign of thoughtful consideration. I learned that true power isn't about control over others. It's about control over yourself. It's not about the name you inherit, but the one you build. My father and brother wanted to own the world. I was content to build my own. They were so busy watching the front door, making sure I couldn't get in, that they never thought to check if I was buying the whole building. The point of this story isn't that you need to be a secret millionaire to get justice. The point is that your worth is not determined by those who refuse to see it. The most powerful thing you can do when someone tries to shrink your world is to expand it in secret, to build your skills, your knowledge, your independence, until your world is so big they can no longer touch the edges of it. If this story of turning the tables gave you a sense of satisfaction, please hit the like button so that more people who might be feeling small can find this message. And to anyone out there who feels like the family scapegoat, the disappointment, the one who just doesn't fit in, stop playing their game. The rules are rigged. Start building your own. Your time will come. Don't waste your energy trying to convince them of your value. Prove it to yourself. The rest will follow. Thank you for listening to my story. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of overcoming and finding your own power.